This is an MSNBC special presentation. In memory, A Day with President Reagan. Here's Lester Holt.
This has been an extraordinary week of remembrance here in Washington and across the country as Americans pay tribute to President Ronald Reagan. A little more than 23 years ago, he arrived in the nation's capital to begin his 2 terms in office. In keeping with a long-lasting tradition, NBC News was granted access inside the White House to spend a full day with the new president, just 1 month into the job. It was the beginning of the so-called Reagan Revolution, and it was already in full swing. We thought you'd like to see that day unfold just the way the late David Brinkley reported it in the following special program from February of 1981.
One day this week, NBC Magazine spent 16 hours in the White House watching President Reagan and his administration concocting bitter pills, budget cuts, and trying to persuade people to swallow them without gagging. It began with everybody at meetings eating grapefruit.
We'd like to continue having that support for this program that we're going to try to go forward with.
I mean, I understand that time frame is extraordinarily tight.
Economic package meetings. With that, I think I'll have to get up and do what the little 9-year-old girl wrote me in a letter, which she said, now get to the Oval Office and get to work.
And then meetings with labor leaders, the cabinet, governors, and a selling job.
Up there ahead is daylight.
And in the process, we see Reagan displaying a personal style unlike his predecessors, easy and casual.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, good to see you. Hi, Art.
How are you?
Just fine.
One of the stories we're reading here about families, the little boy and his mother asked him how many brothers and sisters he had, and he said 11. And he said, my dad must be very expensive. And the little boy says, no, we don't buy them, we raise them.
And like every president, feeling restricted, closed in.
I was reading in one of the magazines, Nancy had some magazines up there the other day. They evidently had a part of a diary of Harry Truman. And it was a better time. He talked about how he delighted in slipping out of the White House and went over to church, walked through the park. None of his advance unit found out about it, slipped into a back pew, said he didn't think anyone even recognized him and all, and took great delight in that. It sounded like fun.
Good evening. We're glad to have you with us. Since our whole hour tonight is spent inside the Reagan White House, our regular gang of 4 is not here. We'll all be here next week. There are those who say he can't do it, that the political pressures against cutting federal payrolls, contracts, subsidies, grants, benefits are so great that Washington, and particularly Congress, cannot stand up to them. Well, that may be true. Modern history suggests it is true. Since 1933 and Franklin Roosevelt and the Depression, nobody has changed the main thrust of the U.S. government. More taxes and more spending, and almost nobody has tried. Reagan will try. In this hour, showing you everything they would allow us to show you, we will be inside the White House as Reagan prepares for his and Washington's trial. We'll be back with all of it.
I'm going to skip breakfast other than what's right here this morning. Thank you. I'm going to stick with just
You're not going banana flakes. Not all bran, but banana flakes if you got them, and a banana.
Down the hall from the Oval Office, on the table are grapefruit, coffee, and coconut donuts for a 7:30 meeting of President Reagan's senior staff in the office of James Baker to look ahead at the day's work schedule.
I think we ought to just play it by ear.
Edwin Meese, he came with Reagan from California, now his senior advisor with cabinet rank. Mike Deaver, Baker's deputy, another Californian.
Half on Friday, and then we break for lunch and come back into the cabinet for an hour. That's nothing.
And Baker, he worked for President Gerald Ford. Now he is Reagan's chief of staff. At 8:10 a.m., the president walks down from the second-floor living quarters. His workday starts with a breakfast with union leaders who supported him. In the first-floor dining room, one of the prettiest in the White House. This breakfast is more substantial. Grapefruit, poached eggs, sausage, bacon, Danish. Photographers from over in the press room are allowed in for about 30 seconds, what the White House calls a photo opportunity. It is early, and all but the president had to travel across town to get here.
The breakfast meeting is ongoing now. Dick, the national security briefing will be
100 yards away in the West Wing offices, another staff meeting, Baker presiding, senior members of the staff discussing who during the day will do what.
And the agenda, okay? We're all set? All set. You're gonna report to the cabinet meeting? Right. Okay. My talking points around the meeting with the governors, Rich, the executive committee first, is that it?
Back in the dining room, Frank Fitzsimmons of the Teamsters.
There's a lot of unnecessary regulation, which would allow greater input of productivity if they were eliminated. The person didn't have to say his Bible every morning.
In fact, I think there are a lot of areas in which what is wrong is the federal government seized upon something that properly belongs at a different level of government, and that they're just not equipped in Washington to deal with problems that'll fit all across this country.
On March 10th, we'll deliver a book that will look like the budget in brief, and that will, you're all probably familiar with that, that's the smallest of the three books. And it's going to be a pretty big, small book this time around, but that'll have all the line-by-line items of all the changes we're going to propose.
Jim, did Ed talk about meeting that date with you this morning? Is the president going to discuss that at cabinet? I mean, I understand that time frame is extraordinarily tight.
They talk of the Reagan speech next Wednesday, joking that the opening and closing are finished, but nothing in between.
Jim,
given the schedule, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get a first draft of the speech to him until about Saturday.
now we're meeting this afternoon.
Yeah, but I can give you the front end and the back end of that based on that. Then we've got a lot of policy in between.
Good evening and good night.
Well, I know that I've run out of time here. I know that you're going to go on having meetings, briefings on this program of ours. Let me just say again that most pleased to have you here, and gives me an opportunity to thank you all for your support during the campaign. But the catch in it is, as I've indicated already, we'd like to continue having that support for this program that we're going to try to go forward with. And in return for that, of course, want your input and continued communication on these problems.
Anybody else got anything?
So with that, I think I'll have to get up and do what the little 9-year-old girl wrote me in a letter. But she said, now get to the Oval Office and get to work.
Now the breakfasts are over and the grapefruit eaten, and next the president meets one group after another, asking help and support in taking control of Washington's spending. We'll be back. With the union leaders stroked and well fed, the president now has laid out for him a day of political salesmanship. It is a hard sell, and he knows it. The biggest spenders in Washington know, and there is no disagreement about this, know the government spends absurd, even ludicrous amounts of money. But there is a song and dance we have all known for years. Whenever a president or anyone proposes to cut the spending, the response is as predictable as a phonograph record. Yes, of course, but where will you cut? Well, that usually shuts him up, because when some specific cut is mentioned, it is taken for granted that whoever would lose by it will fight back, whether it's business, farmers, labor. They will protest, complain in full-page newspaper ads. They will lobby Congress. They will threaten political revenge, put on tantrums. On this day in the White House, Reagan was busy trying to head off some of this.
It's not too cold.
Huh? No.
So at 9 a.m. he walks to the office through an outdoor colonnade, a ramp at the end put in for Franklin Roosevelt's wheelchair. Walking with him are Meese and David Fisher, special assistant. That little walk was the only fresh air he will see all day. The Western outdoorsman, feeling closed in, insisted on opening a White House window that had been sealed for years.
Good morning, good morning.
Helene Van Damme is there with papers to sign. He has been known to complain about all the paper, but he can't stop it.
In February.
Must be 1981. Seems like I've been here long enough now that it should be 1983 or 4, but I don't know.
As of today, you will have met then with every level of government, the mayors, the county execs, state legislators, and now the governors on your economic program.
Then after that, Mr. President,
Deaver,
we've got a meeting
Meese,
with,
and Baker run over the day's schedule with him.
Governors Association. I think there's 17 or 18 governors.
Should we go with Dick Allen?
Right.
Richard Allen, National Security Advisor, in for the day's briefing on world affairs. And Vice President Bush.
This is the biography of the new Polish leader.
Max Friedersdorf, who deals with Congress. Reagan wants a meeting set up.
Listen, could you set up a meeting with Congressman Stenholm, Charlie Stenholm, about, and the group of Democrats that he represents on the, well, so that we can get together and talk to them about the whole economic program and all.
Well, they're coming back the 17th, which is Tuesday, so we'll try to schedule them just as early in the week as possible.
This is the green sheet, which updates the network news summary that you get in the morning and the overnight wires. And
Jim Brady, press secretary. He will give out whatever news develops today, and there will be some.
You planned to do that anyway, hadn't you?
Now, is it all right if I go get a drink of water? It isn't on the schedule.
Across the hall in the Roosevelt Room, it has paintings of both Theodore and Franklin. 18 state governors have come in and are eating jelly beans while they wait.
I'm Murray Wiedenbaum. I'm chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors.
You can get the American people to understand the necessity of doing what the president wants to do.
We got some ideas we want to share with you. We've got to get the economy going.
Amen.
They are pretty good, aren't they?
When the decisions are made, they're made with what appear to be the most accurate facts.
There's one color for each state in the union. Just so far fun to eat. All the colors.
It may not be as good for you as peanuts, but
You know, they're a lot more fun to eat.
While Reagan, in his office, telephones a congressman.
Hello? Trent? I just calling again. I wanted to, before any more time went by, thank you very much for what you did in our recent go-round up there. I know that you saved a lot of souls there in the in the back room.
That's probably my job. I could probably have that.
Bush joins the governors, warming them up. But they're all politicians. They heard the election returns, and they all feel some heat.
I think you'll see in the president, and I won't usurp what he's going to say, but just a determination to go forward with a program that is going to stimulate through tax cuts and save through holding down that growth of federal spending. And I mention it only because he always gets the conversation back to this.
Well, I sure appreciate that, because I'll tell you, we're going to provide the field for the battle when our economic package goes in there.
And he's open-minded. He insists on his people reaching out to others to get their viewpoint. But in terms of insisting that we do what we were elected to do, it's a matter of deep principle. And clearly he's going to solicit and hopefully get the support of the governors. And yet we realize that some of the programs, and part of it is not going to make life easy for everybody.
We're not riding on the backs of the poor. The programs for those people who really must have help, they're not being cut back or touched. I'll be glad finally when the 18th comes and we can get it officially out in front of people so they know. And thank you. Right, bye.
Then Reagan walks over to see the governors.
Hi, how are you?
He is coming in to do a selling job, and they know it. The photographers are invited in again, another photo opportunity.
Some people sniped at me for using the word calamity. We do face a calamity, but if we can lower the rate of increase in government spending and then stimulate the economy, even though we're asking for tax cuts, you know and I know that tax cuts in the tax rates, which only actually are reducing part of that increase. We're not reducing them below what they have been. We're reducing the rate of increase. But if we reduce, with the stimulant of the economy, that tax line begins to approach now the government spending line, up there ahead is daylight. And then I think there will be further tax reductions we can make.
And I would like to take this opportunity on
Governor Busby of Georgia speaks for the governors, concerned about how, in the new government, power will be divided between Washington and the states.
I could start off by saying we all agree with you that the economy is in a mess and immediate steps have to be taken.
I have believed for a long time, till I become almost a Johnny One-Note on it, that a great many of our problems are because from the federal level there has been a concerted attempt, whether they realized what they were doing or not, to change the basic form of our government, which is that we are a federation of sovereign states. And they've tried to make the states administrative districts of the federal government. And it isn't going to work. And this is why we would like, as the time goes on, we'd like to turn many programs totally back to you for administration and turn back the sources to pay for them.
Mr. President, you had two very good, splendid, strong lines in your inaugural address saying what you, in essence, just said. And I want you to know that the governors as a body strongly applauded those. But I also want you to know that as we did so, a whole line of congressmen who were standing down on your level but in front of our box turned around and said, over our dead body. So now you're going to need our help on the Hill because there's going to be fierce resistance to the notion that the states created the federal government and not the other way around. They've got a vested interest down there on the Hill in every little tiny program. They've got a subcommittee and a subcommittee staff on either side, Republican, Democrat, majority, minority, both the House and the Senate. That actually happened. When you said those words, we applauded vigorously, and they just turned around and grinned at us, and they said, over our dead body. Now, so we got a struggle on our hands that we're going to have to do together.
Well, maybe over their dead bodies isn't a bad idea.
We want to help you. Second,
it does create a timing problem, I think.
Later, Reagan leads the governors back to the same room where he had breakfast with the union leaders.
That's the reason if someone approached you. Yeah, I thought it.
The big table now replaced by smaller, round ones. Now, as when he was governor, Reagan likes to use lunchtime for business. Melon and prosciutto, lamb chops, beans, tomatoes, chocolate mousse. And when that's over, the president stands up and answers the governor's questions.
Level of people whose job it would be always to answer the questions for you. How are we doing on returning power to state and local governments?
I couldn't agree more.
I wonder if you could give us some sense of your approach to dealing with the peculiar regional problems that affect the Northeast.
I think basically we thought that the first and prime problem has been to restore the economy and to make us productive again.
The sooner the embargo can be ended, the better we're all going to be.
We're right in the middle now in our cabinet process of this particular problem.
After that, the governors, on their way out, stop in the White House press room and tell what they think about their meetings.
We're unanimous in our feeling that he's on the right track, that if we're going to get the economy straightened out, the type program that he is setting forth is what has to be done, and we're very supportive of him.
I think out of courtesy and good sense, I'm not going to begin to argue against cuts that haven't been proposed.
While Reagan drops in on a meeting of his new Economic Advisory Board, discussing strategy for getting his economic program approved, some familiar faces are here. Arthur Burns, Herbert Stein, Milton Friedman,
I don't know, maybe they were cabinet meetings and everything, always stop and that's...
George Schultz, Alan Greenspan.
Well, listen, I want to thank all of you for...
Private, business, and professional people volunteering their help.
Very much. I know you've been briefed on our program and are having briefings more on what it is we're going to propose, and they're going to rush me out of here in a few minutes because I got a meeting with some labor leaders who probably won't be as approving of, I don't know, maybe they will be.
These union leaders waiting in the Oval Office are those who did not support Reagan. Lane Kirkland, president of the AFL-CIO, Douglas Fraser, president, United Automobile Workers, and they too talked to the press outside when they left, but they didn't say much.
Well, if they're big cuts, will you support them?
It depends where they are and how big they are.
And that's the basic strategy, all sweetness and light here, but you're going to fight on the Hill.
It depends on what there is to fight about.
Do you really support the idea of President Reagan stripping the government of 30, 40 years of social programs, New Deal, Great Society?
If that's what happens, we'll be fighting.
They didn't say much, and for several reasons. One is that they have constituents, members, and they don't want to sound as if they have come to Washington and bought Reagan's package without even feeling the goods. Another is they all remember the old adage, politics is the science of who gets what, and still another is that they don't yet know exactly who gets what. We'll be back with more. You can talk all you want about cutting spending and balancing the budget and so on, but there is one kind of cut you cannot make. Cannot. You cannot take a nickel away from old folks, blind in wheelchairs, school children who can't concentrate because they're hungry. You cannot tax people when they're young and working and then let them starve when they're old. Doing that would destroy any administration, and should. Reagan and his people know that. Now, in the White House, it is coming up on time for the cabinet meeting where that will be discussed. Seating for the cabinet meeting, organized. On the table will be coffee and, of course, jelly beans. Reagan has more cabinet meetings than any president in years. He believes in cabinet government. Others generally have not. Regan, Treasury. Smith, Attorney General. Pierce, Housing. Casey, CIA. Weinberger, Defense. Stockman, Budget. Allen, National Security. Haig, State.
Right. Good morning. Good morning, all. Everyone looks very bright and happy. Let's see. Agenda is mainly concerned with the economic program, though. Try not to smile too much. And so, with that settled then, I'd like to call on Penn James for a report on our progress in the personnel area.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The White House is disturbed at complaints it is slow in filling the big jobs. James puts on a little show for the cabinet and says they're doing better now than most new presidents.
Figures that might be of interest to the cabinet because we have received some criticism of the pace in which the administration is making in the cabinet appointments, sub-cabinet appointments. There have been 42 appointments sent from your office, sir. And in comparison, and I hate comparisons to previous administrations, but since we're constantly being compared, I looked up Carter track record as of date, same date, which is in this case February 7th, where we have sent 42 to the Senate for confirmation. President Carter had sent 18. So that's not too bad.
Penn, thank you very much.
Mr. President, if I might, Penn, do you have as far as the pace of appointments is concerned, do you have the numbers from other prior administrations in addition to the Carter administration? Because I think the cabinet would be interested in those numbers too.
President Eisenhower had 34 at this point in time. President Kennedy had 37. Richard Nixon had 47. Jimmy Carter had 18. And you, sir, have 42.
Well, I think we're holding our own. All right, well, we're getting down to the agenda now, an economic program. I know that Secretary Reagan and Dave Stockman have been working night and day to bring together the elements on this program. Then I'm going to, before we get into the details of the program, ask Dave Stockman for an overview of what's been going on here.
I have to say that I am not one to shrink from a tough task. But I must also say, and I think every cabinet member here will agree with me, that the goals that you gave us are extraordinarily difficult to reconcile, but I'm pleased to report today that we're almost there. The four objectives that you gave us as we attempted to formulate this economic plan were: one,
Stockman at the moment is Washington's big number. So fast with big figures, he scares old Washington hands. He has been through the budget looking for cuts and found a lot of them.
Second, to provide the additional resources that we're going to need to rebuild our national defenses and ensure our international security. Third, to achieve a balanced budget at the earliest possible date, but no later than the 1983-84 period. And fourth, to protect all essential government programs and all benefits for the truly needy. To date, we have found and identified and gotten consensus in the Budget Working Group and with the cabinet members for 72% of the savings that we would have to achieve in order to meet that $53 billion reduction target. Now, Mr. President, I would like to say that we have been able to achieve that by making some very tough choices, and that if we can stick with the cuts that we've agreed to thus far, we can avoid cutting some other programs that I would like to itemize very quickly, and that
what he says here turns out to be today's big news from the White House, that 7 programs absolutely, positively will not be cut.
First of all, we are proposing no reductions in the cost of living adjustment for the 32 million Americans who receive retirement benefits or disability benefits under Social Security. Secondly, we have proposed to fully fund the breakfast and lunch program for low-income and lower middle-income children in our schools today who get free lunches and breakfasts. A third program that we have recommended no reductions in is Medicare. Another important program that we've fully protected, that we've recommended no reductions in, is Head Start. A fifth program that we've avoided.
I interrupt Dave to say that I think that program is going to save us money in the long haul.
Bell Education.
That early, we're going to make taxpayers out of potential tax eaters. So
That's
I applaud that
precisely right.
decision. I think it's a wise one.
A sixth program that we have not recommended cuts on is the Supplemental Security Income Program. That costs the federal government $8 billion a year, but it provides a decent level of income and a decent standard of living for 4.1 million blind, poor elderly, and disabled. Finally, a seventh program, to give you a further indication that we've recommended no change in, is the Summer Youth Employment Program. There is great pressure being put on me, on the White House staff, and on members of the cabinet to retreat from some of these reductions. But I want to tell you, if we retreat 1 cent on any of those proposals, then there is no way that I can meet your goals except to recommend some reductions in these programs that we have protected thus far.
Dave, thank you very much, and I might say a thank you to all of you. I think this is just wonderful. Anything further to add? Any comments? Or? I would encourage that you give me orders and that everybody stand fast.
Watt, interior.
Because if this starts to waver and we start folding on one or two budget cuts, the whole cutting system will cascade on us and we won't be able to stand tough with the political pressures. Several things I'd like to cut if my back's pushed to the wall, and it should be kept to the wall so that I don't waver on you or that anybody else wavers and causes me to want to cut and run.
Well, that afternoon, Jim Brady tells the press room about this, about what will not be cut, and that's the lead story in the morning papers and on that night's network news program.
The administration made more decisions on what to take out and what to leave in the first Reagan budget. More from Judy Woodruff.
White House officials concede they're growing worried that the president's economic package is being perceived as too rough on the poor. That's why
reporters, NBC, CBS, and ABC, telling the news from out on the White House lawn.
As well as showing some compassion. Most of these popular programs about
$10 billion, more than a quarter of the projected 1982.
Will be unveiled. Judy Woodruff, NBC News, the White House.
Look back a little. Every president any of us can remember had some kind of style, manner, personality. From Harry Truman, plain and unpretentious, honest and tough, to Jimmy Carter, not all that friendly. The angrier he was, the wider his smile, to Reagan.
Hey, whoops. For heaven's sakes. Hi there.
There's a style and manner about Reagan, unlike any modern president. Folksy good-naturedness in the way he greets people, tells little jokes, easy and casual.
One of the stories we're leaving here about families, the little boy and his, I asked him how many brothers and sisters he had, and he said 11. And I said, my, that must be very expensive. And the little boy says, no, we don't buy them, we raise them.
All right. Maybe it's the Western outdoorsy background. He is, after all, the only president in generations who liked to ride horses, build ranch fences, cut brush, ride in the mountains, camp out, sleep in a tent, cook over a campfire.
Into a victory for you. So I thought you might, that's just personal stories beginning with the New Hampshire primary, some of the things we did for your campaign.
Thank you very much. I'll enjoy this more than a lot of the things they put on my desk.
Maybe it is because he came to politics late in life, did not grow up with the cagey, cautious manner seen in so many lifelong professional politicians.
This is your home, properly identified with the family Reagan, the Reagan family, and the logo is families are forever.
You're wired for sound control.
Yes.
I see.
Yes, you are.
Whatever the reason, politics and philosophy totally aside, people he meets find he is not threatening, not overwhelming, not an egomaniac, but a man who, if you're tuned in that way, would be pleasant to be with outdoors, and who could gather up brush, build a little fire, scour out the skillet, and cook a fairly decent hamburger.
And you're still playing very well in Peoria, sir. Remember the sign my husband had up for you?
So for the day, the work, the selling, the persuading are over. The business of asking people to accept what they don't want to accept. That is, to accept less and to smile, or try to. The workday is over, but for one more stop. Mr. President, you've had about 3 weeks here in the White House now. How do you like it so far?
Well, it's exciting, sometimes frustrating, but it's been so busy that I'm almost caught unawares when you ask a question like that, but I have to say I like actually now being able to deal with the things that for so long a time all we've done is talk about.
We have been with you all day, and you have been in one meeting and then another meeting and then another meeting. Do you like to work that way? Is that effective for you?
No, but then I know that there are some days like that. And not every day is like this one where it just went from literally one to the other. When I said it was a little frustrating, on days like that, I see the things pile up on my desk and the folders come in, information and so on, and I haven't even time to open them.
You were complaining about a pile of paper this high.
Yes, and I get a little I get a little frustrated with that. But I know it has to happen. Tomorrow, on the other hand, will be an entirely different type of schedule where I'll be able to be at that desk for a few hours at a stretch.
Well, given absolute choice, how do you like to work? Do you like to talk to your group, to your staff, and make joint decisions? Or you make the decision, but you discuss them jointly?
Oh, I like the input, yes, of other people. And our cabinet meetings are that way also, as probably found there today. But that is the only difference between, I've heard them referred to as a board of directors or something. That's the only difference. I have to make the decision.
Have you thought about the fact that the last president who tried really seriously to change the course of the American economy in a substantial way was Franklin Roosevelt in 1933? No one has tried since then?
Well, without saying anything about those who followed, it is true. And isn't it somewhat comparative today that he came in at a kind of watershed time when the people said, we cannot continue in this path, we have to try something, and he was willing to try. And I think that while it is not as extreme a situation as it was then, maybe the fact that many people alive today went through that same traumatic experience of the Great Depression, that they're willing to try because they don't want to see it get to that point.
You are making a speech next week, giving in some detail what you hope to achieve, right? Have you thought about the reaction you're going to get?
Well, yes.
You prepared for it?
I think so, because at least here, I had a previous experience that relates. When I became governor of California, we were faced with much the same situation. So I know the pressures that can be brought with regard to cuts in the budget and things that have to be trimmed. Yes, I think I'm prepared, but I think there is one difference now. I think the people today, and I think the members of Congress, are aware that something has to be done, that we cannot continue on the path of ever bigger deficits and just endlessly running in debt, that maybe the budget is out of control.
Now today, here at the White House, you have talked to a group of state governors on this subject, a group of labor leaders. What kind of reactions did you get?
Well, the state governors, all of them, Democrat and Republican, recognize what I just said, that we cannot go on, something has to be done. We wanted their input, and they have agreed they're going to give us their thinking on, with regard to budget cuts, as well as the tax situation. And the labor leaders, there were two groups. One was more openly supportive. The other was very frank about that there may be differences in their views to priorities of cutting here and there. But there was no great opposition from any source.
Have you run into the old Washington game? Cutting the budget is fine. I agree it should be done. Expenses have to go down, but don't cut mine.
The only thing that licks them on that one is that there isn't anyone exempt.
Have you thought of saying to those who object, all right, but have you got a better idea?
I've thought of it, and maybe before the arguments are over on this, I will be saying that. We've gone along for decades now with this belief that we could spend more than we take in, and now the deficit is approaching $1 trillion. And it is time to say we should try something different. And if not this, then tell us what.
Do you ever have the feeling that you now, in putting this program through, are going to take the heat for something that should have been done a long time ago?
Well, I went into this with my eyes open, and I'm perfectly willing to do that. It has to be done.
At the end of a day like this, all of that persuading and stroking, an outdoorsman allowed a total of 17 seconds outside in the fresh air. He wants to get out. Well, later in the evening he does, sort of. We'll be back. Harry Truman's little walks around the streets of Washington were much noticed and remarked on, partly because he was the first president in about 14 years who could walk, Roosevelt having been confined to a wheelchair. And before that, back to Hoover, there wasn't even a fence around the White House. People walked in the summer and had picnics on the White House lawn, and there was not much concern with security. But for all presidents, that kind of freedom is gone.
I was reading in one of the magazines, Nancy had some magazines up there the other day. They evidently had a part of a diary of Harry Truman. And my, it was a better time. He talked about how he delighted in slipping out of the White House and went over to church, walked through the park. None of his advance unit found out about it, slipped into a back pew. Said he was didn't think anyone even recognized him and all, and took great delight in that. It sounded like fun.
I'm sure it was, but remember, there was very little television then. Not so many people saw Truman on television. Truman looked like everybody in the world anyway.
Yeah.
And he could go anywhere. It's too late for you. You can't do that.
It was too late for me before I got here.
Of course it was. Well, as I say, you're about through. It's been a long day.
Yeah, isn't over yet. I got to go to the ballet.
Kennedy Center, the presidential box, always held open for him. It seats about 8. Backstage with the Dance Theater of Harlem, run by Arthur Mitchell. Started 11 years ago with next to no money. Now they dance all over the world, are much admired.
They were just great, really.
That man, Mitchell, who's head of it, he took him off the streets and the drug scene and all of that. And they're all, I think that's just wonderful.
It's a long day as the president?
Yes. Yes, it has been long, but it starts right in again in the morning.
For all of us at NBC Magazine, including a number who worked all night to get all of this put together fast, thank you and good night.